The rule for the circular parties of warriors. On one occasion, I accompanied Don Melcher on a trip to Mexico City to deliver a small sack containing a rare medicinal herb he had been keeping for a friend, a Sonora market trader. From there, we walked through the streets of the city center to visit the pyramid of Tlaloc, the god of rain and hurricanes, located within an underground station. Amid the bustling river of people which flowed in waves, we came to the sacred place of the ancients. Don Melcher showed me symbols on the monument which I would never have noticed without his help, and explained that what we were looking at was just the top of the pyramid, and that its body remained buried under the structure of the station. "What does it mean?" I asked. "The serpent that encircles the pyramid corresponds to the element water. The four-pointed pyramid means the element earth. The round structure that is located at the top corresponds to the element air and the roof, which was usually a flimsy structure built of sticks and straw, relates to the element fire." There, on the spot and in the midst of the crowd, he explained that only the apex of the pyramid was round. Answering my question, he said that few round-top pyramids remained in existence, but that there were still sorcerers who followed practices associated with them. From there we walked through a long tunnel with its book market until we got to the Zocola, where we visited the sculpture of Coyolaxauhqui. Don Melcher said that the stone upon which maidens used to be dismembered was the symbol of death. I did not know if that was true or not, but I felt the panic of those girls in the pit of my stomach. In my imagination, I could see what used to happen in that place. I told Don Melcher that I wanted to get out of there. He agreed, and said that I was open enough for what was coming next. I wanted to know what he meant, but he put a finger to his lips to indicate we should be silent. He pointed at something in the sky high above the cathedral. At first I saw nothing, but then something adjusted itself, and my eyes took in what he was indicating. It was a black shadow of deformed and sinister appearance, floating like a giant balloon over the buildings. I immediately grabbed Don Melcher's arm. He told me to calm down and not show fear or surprise. He called it the shadow, but I knew what it was I was seeing. That shadow, as he referred to it, was neither more nor less than one of the flyers Carlos Castaneda spoke about. That was the first time I have ever seen one. Trembling from head to toe, I felt nauseated and vomited. Don Melcher kindly took care of me and said I still wasn't ready. I asked, "Not ready for what?" "For what will come later," he answered, and laughed as if he had beaten me at a game. Later he told me, "Each lineage is seeking its own way to freedom. That is the real goal. To reach it, the Nahual uses all available resources. If it were not for self-importance, following the Nahual would be child's play. All it really takes is love of freedom and willingness to do anything to achieve it." Long after that visit to the Zocola, Don Melcher took me to the pyramid of Cuicuilco, which is also in Mexico City, near the Ciudad Universitaria. As we walked around this magnificent monument, one of the few existing circular pyramids, he told me, "This pyramid's intent is dedicated to the warriors of the party of the Plumed Serpent." He said that I had faithfully followed the teachings and that my time had finally come. In his opinion, I was ready for what was coming. "And what is it that's coming, Don Melcher?" "Knowledge is coming," he replied. "And knowledge is power. If you manage to flow with the meaning of what I say, power will take you, and it might happen that you'll go on flowing with it, perhaps forever. If that happens, it will be possible for you to embark on your ultimate voyage." He said that place was, For the healers, the most sacred of all places. I asked him why. Because this is where the intent of our ancestors is concentrated. This place is the symbol of our culture. The intent of thousands of sorcerers who have followed the path of the Plumed Serpent is accumulated here. This is, therefore, the appropriate place for me to pass on to you the knowledge that you have been waiting for so long. In fact, all the healers of the tradition of the serpent come to this place to receive and transmit that knowledge. It is possible that one day you yourself will come here to communicate it to someone else. If you like, you can call this an academic tradition. To achieve their goals, warriors obey the rule of the Nawal, which is not a set of laws created by men, but rather structures of power obtained by means of seeing. When did the rule begin? Who discovered it? The seers of antiquity, seeking to establish order in the chaos they were seeing, agreed it was necessary to organize groups of warriors according to the order that forms the structure of the universe itself. Through their seeing, they examined the structure that supports the universe. They discovered that the energy patterns of ego's emanations generate geometric forms that spontaneously bunch together into clusters, which integrate all the elements we perceive as our known world. That is exactly what those groupings of energy are. Energy clusters that we, after a long process of skimming, perceive as the physical world. The seers then copied the design of the structures they saw and established warrior parties based on their visions. For its solidity, the pyramid structure was chosen for warrior parties, which from then on adopted the way of the four cardinal directions. Organized thus, they managed to survive for many thousands of years. As I've already explained, simultaneously with the attempt at pyramidal parties, some groups of seers opted for the circular form. Our tradition says that the seers of antiquity saw that the structure of the universe was originally circular, or rather that it was a sphere, the structure of which was maintained by pyramidal patterns in such a way that the entire universe, with its billions of galaxies, was contained within a single gigantic bubble, crisscrossed by myriads of light rays. Those rays intersected and formed an infinite number of pyramidal patterns. After analyzing their visions, the Tikis decided not to copy the basic structure of a pyramid, but rather the overall structure of the universe that gives existence to all other structures. That was how the first attempts to organize circular warrior parties began. They are actually spherical, conglomerates of warriors with a Nawal pair in the center. Those parties are more like bubbles of awareness floating in eternity. The initial intent of those ancient warriors was to join their extreme points. They became a mystery, even to the sorcerers of the pyramids, who were increasingly becoming interested in worldly rule over their peers, rather than in the quest for freedom. How were those parties formed? The fundamental structure of the rule for circular parties demands that the minimum number be two, a male and a female, who are the head of the serpent, so to speak. The size of the serpent is relative to the power of the Nawals. As the party grows in number, more rings are added to the body of the rattlesnake. They make up each of the remaining parts: heart, belly, and tail. And depending on the power of the Nawals, even the rattle can be added. The truth is that the party was designed just for the Nawal pair. The others are added, sustained by the energy of the pair. That is the basis of creation, the essence of everything. Male and female forever. No other evolutionary form exists. That is the rule. How many warriors make up those parties? As I said, the minimum number is 2, but in theory there is no upper limit to the number of participants. It depends on the power of the Nawals who form the party. But warriors can only be added in pairs. How does this type of party function? The serpent formation is divided lengthwise into halves. The right half is male and the left is female. The rest of the structure is flexible and works in a very natural way. For this type of party, there are no fixed rules like with other structures. Here, everything is governed by omens. Don Melcher joined the thumbs and index fingers of both hands to form 2 circles, then interchanged the fingers in a circular movement, ending up by forming the symbol for infinity. As he moved his fingers, he said, "Each individual contributes his own energy, thereby helping stabilize the party, adding his qualities to feed the growth of others." The force of Don Melcher's gesture, and even more the tone of his words, really made me feel what he said. Continuing with his explanation, he said, "As they grew in number, the ancient serpent warriors formed new parties of power, following the same structure from which they descended. Those who made up the body of the serpent were called families. Each generation of sorcerers was a family, and the succession of families a lineage of power. I asked if anyone seeking knowledge could become part of the Nawal's party. Don Melcher replied, "Nawalism is not for sale. As it was in the past, it is still a matter of omens as to who may or may not participate in a party. There is no rule, however, that prevents anyone from trying. Of course, the challenges those who attempt to do it by themselves face are huge, and that is why hardly anyone even tries. But there are those who will risk everything in the race against death. What unites a team of warriors is not only their unbending intent of freedom. Families of sorcerers are also sustained by the affinity between comrades. The purpose of a family of tikis is to transform itself into a unit of pure perception. To achieve this, the Nawal man and woman change into a line of energy, into a worm of light, to which other warriors are added. To join the Nawal pair's intent, those warriors align their assemblage point in a homologous way so that they acquire uniformity and cohesion. Like a chrysalis that has hatched, the warriors transform into a new being the old seers used to call the Plumed Serpent, a cosmic being that sets off to explore the universe. Thus emerged the rule for circular pyramids, also called the rule of the serpent. Here, the essence of the union between genders is not of sexual nature. The intent is to form a ring of pure perception where male and female energies unite and complete each other. In accordance with the rule, the final act of the Nawal pair is to entwine, forming the eternal circle. At that moment, the warriors who have joined their fate with the Nawal pair are brought together into a circle of energy. In that way, the party disappears, finally, from this world, their departure creating a force that draws in everything around it. As I was learning the fine points of the cult of the Plumed Serpent, Don Melcher took several opportunities to explain those aspects of the rule which pertain to our lineage of warriors. It is very important that you understand the basis of our beliefs if you are to go deeper into them, he told me on one occasion. I replied that I was feeling ready to move my apprenticeship up a step, but he smiled and said that only the Spirit could say if I was really ready or not. You must understand that our tradition is governed by the ancestral rule, which we who follow it call the cosmic web. We are each of us under obligation to personally contact the rule and learn its intricacies. As you can imagine, over the time, communities of warriors formed to pursue the goal of biting one's tail. They formed lineages and adopted the circle as the rule for their parties. They even built circular pyramids to express their intent. For them, it was a way of giving themselves an opportunity to attempt the evolutionary leap. Taken as a map, the rule is an intricate set of guidelines and procedures which increase the chances of success in the pursuit of freedom. Established lineages follow the universal rule. The way each party of warriors interprets the details of the rule, or the personal rule of a warrior, those are acts of seeing, accumulated during the lifetime of each participant. Having accepted the rule, the warrior starts exploring for himself, thus validating and expanding the same rule. He usually collects evidence of those aspects of the rule he has verified and shares it with others. Agreement between participants makes up a large portion of the rule for warrior parties. To be part of a party, one must primarily be able to uphold the common intent. And for that, it is necessary that each participant has been in contact with the rule and has accepted its propositions. Who does not accept is out. It's that simple. One day I confronted Don Melcher with the details of the rule that Carlos had described in his books. "What can you tell me about that type of warrior party?" I asked with great curiosity, remembering how pithy Carlos had been with that information. He explained, in an attempt to disobey the eagle's command, which says that all living beings without exception must die, the seers organized groups of explorers and examined all the available possibilities. They saw that the command was indeed final. But as they went deeper into the matter, they realized that to die was the transitional stage between this world and the other one, before the complete disintegration of the self and its union with the whole. In the investigations that followed, the seers discovered that it was possible to outmaneuver death and keep awareness intact. Recapitulation helps achieve that goal by stimulating memory. As you know, the universe as such is a huge collective memory containing the totality of all that was, is, and will be. We are like its neurons, or perhaps even less than that. Perhaps one should say a particle orbiting a nucleus. The point is that this little electron, or whatever, suddenly gains awareness of itself, and, in order to know its place in the grand scheme, performs its task so impeccably that it attains freedom. Don Melcher laughed at his analogy and said that actually the most important thing anyone could do was to get busy with the task of recapitulation, because that was what guaranteed the survival of awareness after the end of our organic time. I had always marveled at his erudition In fact, the healers were very well informed of all the advances in science. Don Gabanito even received magazines with news about science. Regarding traditional warrior parties, Don Melcher said, "The rule for those parties postulates the pyramid structure, designed so that four-pronged nawals are directed by its square base. The four sides are the four cardinal directions, with the four winds associated with them. From that starting point, depending on their interests, the warriors of each pyramid group can draw any kind of interpretation." Could you tell me more about the general rule? The rule manifests itself in everything that exists: colors, sound, the sciences, mathematics, geometry, astronomy, genetics, everything. We call modern scientists the discoverers of the rule, because that is what modern science does. It discovers aspects of the universal rule. The rule of the Nawal has diverse portions. And Don Melcher went on to list the different areas where the rule applied in respect of warrior parties. There are rules for each individual warrior according to his direction or inclinations. We have already discussed the rule for Nawals. There also exist normative rules for the planet of dreamers and for that of stalkers, for the party as a whole, for the lineage, and finally, the rule is present in each minute aspect of the entire process that has been taking place since the forming of the parties, including the rules for the behavior of warriors. What are the rules for warriors' behavior? I asked. To be impeccable, Don Melcher replied. I grumblingly told him that his answer did not explain anything. I had expected a list of things one could and could not do. But it does explain things, he retorted. Impeccability is like a multi-use tool that fits any occasion. For example, between good and excellent, a warrior always chooses what is better. And when he has to choose between a bad egg and a completely rotten one, the warrior always strategically chooses the one which will cause the least possible damage. He laughed at his own words and then added, Impeccability means always giving the best of yourself, all the time, in everything you do, even when the situation is not the most favorable. I begged him for more details, but he told me that I would discover them for myself over the time. As my association with the healers meant, I had to observe every facet of the rule. What is the healer's view on the matter of the three-pronged nawal? I asked. Don Melcher replied, Three-pronged nawals are a necessary anomaly within the cycle of the nawals of the Holy Cross. They appear only rarely, but when one does appear, it is because the cycle his party belongs to is about to fulfill its destiny. What do you mean? Well, according to the rule, all parties have a riddle. Just as each warrior receives a task to fulfill as part of his individual path to freedom, each party and each lineage has its own riddle to solve. A warrior's riddles must be solved in his lifetime, or he'll perish in the attempt. The same goes for a party of warriors. Their opportunities to solve the riddle of their existence lasts as long as their time on earth. A party of warriors makes it as a group only if each of its members has been able to solve his or her own riddles. And as for deciphering the riddle of a lineage, the lifespan of lineages is 52 generations of warriors' parties. A lineage attains holiness, however, only if all the parties that constitute it achieve their objective. If not, the chain breaks and they are obliged to start all over again. So, when a lineage is about to reach its peak, a three-pronged Nawal appears, not to continue the lineage as would normally be the case, but to dissolve it, closing a chapter before opening a new one. During that process, the teachings spread out. In the past, such dissemination was extremely dangerous because the Nawals and their parties were hunted down and killed. Now, however, the circumstances are different. Through spreading of formerly secret knowledge, new lineages may arise, restarting the process. I remembered that Carlos Castaneda had explained some aspects of his energetic condition. He told everyone that he was a singular case because he was a three-pronged Nawal, not a four-pronged one. He used to say, "I cook on my own fire." He told me once that his teacher, even though he knew that he, Carlos, was inadequate, never said anything. I asked him about it, and Carlos replied, "Don Juan did not immediately tell me what he had discovered, because that would have gone against the commands of his own rule." Why? The rule for four-pronged Nawals dictates that they should be informed from the start about their future responsibilities as leaders of a party. They receive this information in both states of awareness. Don Juan, however, only taught me that in heightened awareness. In my normal awareness, he kept me entangled in a tremendous theatrical charade, so it took me many years to remember it all. The Nawal's task, as his party develops, consists in remembering the rule and adapting it to his particular conditions. In other words, a Nawal transforms the general interpretation into the individual one. The rule for three-pronged Nawals, however, works in a different way. How does a three-pronged Nawal integrate into a four-pronged group? I asked. He doesn't. The peculiarity of my energy only allows me to create groups with three sides. I can't do classical parties, the four-pronged ones. I'd dissolve them. That is exactly what happened to the party of warriors that Don Juan had put together for me. They were left without a leader to guide them. That is why Don Juan did what he could, and took with him the best prepared ones, Eligio, La Soledad, and the Nawal woman. What? I said, confused. I had seen Carol at his last presentation. Carol was sent back in the hope that she could help the others, but they are really impossible. One can get anywhere with them. One can't get anywhere with them. I understood that by them, he was referring to his old party composed of the Little Sisters and the Genaros, and asked, what are their real chances? Everything rests in the hands of the power that governs all things, he said with finality in his voice. That power speaks through omens, or at least that is how sorcerers understand it. I asked, somewhat rhetorically, if it is so hard for apprentices who are in direct contact with Don Juan, what then are the chances for those who read your books and are interested in following the path of the warrior? Sorcerers do not seek disciples. If someone has been announced by an omen as a prospective apprentice, or even more importantly as an Nawal, his benefactor will spare no effort to help him, thus fulfilling the mandate of duplicating his own group. Once chosen, a prospective Nawal is then trained for years as leader of a regular party of warriors, exactly as in my case. When my energy anomaly became obvious, however, Don Juan and his party went back to the rule for a drastic revision. They discovered that what they had on their hands was not totally out of place, since there was a specific rule for my case. On examining the matter more closely, they saw the three-pronged Nawal for what he really was, an alien parasite inadvertently slipping into the lineage and disintegrating it. Under those conditions, Don Juan did the only thing left to him to do. A warrior always chooses the best option, and if life gives you a lemon, you make lemonade. That is why he designed a strategy for making knowledge public, and thereby closing his lineage with a golden key. That was the only reason for making the achievements of his lineage by that. Don Juan is directly responsible for the books I wrote. It was he who instructed me to prepare my manuscript as my degree thesis. Don Juan used the established institutions to publicize his message. Following a different course of action would have meant frittering away precious knowledge that has traditionally been kept as top secret for generations. In my case, there was an additional anomaly due to my teacher's somewhat hasty decision to introduce me to what he thought was my group of warriors. Because of that decision, he was forced to redesign the departure strategy of his own party. It had become clear to everyone that the apprentices were doomed and that I was going to be practically alone in this world. Meanwhile, I had failed to demonstrate my worth as three-pronged Nawal, and the only remedy Don Juan found for that was to entrust the continuation of my training to the spirit. In other words, the rule of the three-pronged Nawal was to be communicated to me at some point in the future by a messenger they did not know. Just before leaving, however, Don Juan told me the essentials of my task. He did it in such a veiled form that it was only years later, when I recapitulated the conversation I had with the messenger, that my teacher's revelations became structured as a coherent line of thought. The pieces of the puzzle came together, and I could understand the pernicious reason for presence among them. Why do you say that it was a pernicious reason? By saying that, I just follow the course of thoughts of my benefactor and his warriors. For them, sorcery was a strictly controlled activity, regulated by the principles of discretion and strategy. Although they fully belonged to the breed of new seers, for whom trade secrets weren't worth a peanut, their activities and emotions, to a great extent, still belonged to the past. For that reason, they would have seen my task as something truly devastating, because it had to do with giving sorcery to people, or rather bringing people to Nawal, and not just in small groups, but in great masses. Of course, for modern seers, there's nothing nefarious about my task. It is a natural occurrence in the flow of energy. They know that times of change need to be faced with renewed spirit. Part 5. Transmutations. On one occasion, at the time when I could already feel the effects of the teachings, I had to spend a few days in the city. I stayed in an empty apartment which belonged to a friend of the healers in a residential block. While I was there, I dreamed that I was a dog. I remember that I could feel my snout and my teeth in a totally realistic way. What surprised me most was my dog's vision. I saw everything blurred or distorted and without color. In my dream as dog, I saw myself go up a staircase which looked like a mountain of steps before me. I passed through a metal door that was ajar. Up there I could sense the fresh air and see the sky. Suddenly, out of nowhere, an enormous dog appeared, furious and running towards me with the clear intention of attacking me. I ran away from him, jumped a low fence, and fell into emptiness. In my dream, I saw the enormous dog that was chasing me jump the fence in my wake. In one last glimpse, I perceived his fright and heard him groan with regret for having had jumped, but it was already too late. I kept on seeing dream images pass in front of me at full speed. I grabbed onto one of them. It was my room in the healer's house and my bedroll. Woke up and knew that I had been dreaming. I got up, went up the stairs leading to the roof of the building, and looked for the banister. I could see that down below lay the neighbor's Alsatian dead. A few days later, after I had returned to the healer's house, Don Melcher took me to see a very special cave. The entrance seemed to lead to a tunnel and was completely circular. When we entered, everything became dark after just a few steps, and a little further on the darkness was total. It was then that I saw the energy of the earth for the first time. After a spell of inner silence, in total darkness, I saw the whole cave ignite with brilliantly green color, as if the walls were emitting a living greenish light resembling neon. I felt inundated by that light. The experience left me with a sensation of plenitude that lasted hours, so huge I did not even want to speak. Finally, breaking the silence, Don Melcher explained that we had been in the womb of our Holy Mother Earth. In the course of the conversation, I told him what had happened to me on my visit to Mexico City. He commented mysteriously that I was a proper diablero. My curiosity was aroused at once, and I asked him directly, "What is a diablero, Don Melcher?" "It is a term used by the godfathers of the North. There are some people in our parts who use it, but it is more frequent up north. To understand this term, you need to know the history of our people, and particularly anything concerning the brotherhood of knowledge led by the Nawals. In ancient times, after the arrival of the conquistadors, the Nawals had to conceal their practices from laymen and assassins. Our ancestors chose to join the religion brought by the white man. Some sorcerers, however, took the opposite direction, hid in remote places, and adopted the name of Diableros. They chose that name for the fear and respect it instilled in people, with the objective of keeping them at a distance. The Diableros used the faith of the people to frighten them. It was an effective strategy that worked for centuries. Today, hardly anyone uses it, but that does not mean Diableros don't exist. As you know, Mexicans, those from the time of the conquest as well as those of today, are very religious folk, and one must take that into consideration if one wants to coexist with them. We use Catholic imagery to achieve our objective of putting the patient in the state of inner silence. We exploit, so to speak, the patient's faith, only this time for his personal gain, to be healed. It is characteristic for Diableros that they don't like having people around, which is why they scare them. To chase away the public, they generate fear, suspicion, and disgust. Yes, I understand, but what does it take for a sorcerer to be considered a Diablero? Those sorcerers know how to transform physically, usually into the animal of their predilection. Don Melcher replied, laconically, "A Diablero is by definition a sorcerer who controls his assemblage point and uses it to transform physically into an animal or into anything." I knew a Diablero who used to transform into fire. He'd begin by igniting himself, and in a few seconds, he'd be a human torch walking to and fro without burning himself. Sorcerers can transform into almost anything if they place the assemblage point in the correct position. They can turn into whatever they want, from a microbe to an elephant. Some sorcerers spend their lives experimenting with alternative perceptions. For example, it is possible to try and experience the world from the perspective of an animal. I enjoy very much seeing the world as a falcon. He watched me as if measuring the effect of his words. "Can you really transform into a bird, Don Melcher?" "Yes, I can, and if you wish, I'll teach you how to do it," he said firmly. My mind suddenly went blank. My fear was as great as my excitement. On one hand, my rational mind did not believe a word of what the old man was saying. But on the other hand, there were the stories of Carlos and his teacher transforming into crows. After some hesitation, I said that I'd be delighted to know those secrets. He told me we would have to prepare ourselves for the event, and that it would be a great moment for me. One day, long after that conversation, Don Melcher and I were walking through the desert of Wirikuta on our annual pilgrimage. He called me, and we began moving away from other walkers. Although I did not know where we were headed, I followed him. We finally got completely separated from the others. We had been gathering peyote for 4 days. In the evening, we would gather the plants, and at night, we would perform the ceremony of communion. On our last day, as we approached some high hills, we spotted an owl flying in circles over our heads. It seemed to me strange to see an owl fly during the day, so close to us. On impulse, I took a piece of dry meat out of my rucksack and offered it to the bird. To my surprise, it flew up to where I was, took the food from my hand with its claws, and flew away. Don Melcher followed the flight of the bird attentively until it disappeared somewhere on the eastern horizon. He told me that luck was smiling on me and that he was going to teach me a sorcerer's secret. I did not know what he was talking about and asked him what he was referring to. He said that the flight of that owl was an omen and that he was going to teach me secrets, but that we would not discuss it there and then. At nightfall, Don Melcher called me over to the fire. He said I was soft enough and that we were going to go ahead with the magic. He then taught me the prayers and spells that would transform me into an owl. We spent days working on the transformation as Don Melcher guided me step by step through the procedure. My reason was the greatest obstacle I had to overcome. On the third night of intending the transformation, we achieved our objective. The truth is that by then, there was very little left of my rationality. I allowed myself to go with the sound of Don Melcher's voice in such a way that when I noticed I was flying through the air, I had no fear whatsoever, as if I had done it all my life. I had transformed into an owl. I was looking at the world through the eyes of a bird and could perceive a small peak in front of my eyes. I could see the night with clouds all white in moonlight. Below, I could discern the outlines of the hills and of the cactuses on the plains. When I woke up, I was naked among the hills. I knew that something phenomenal had happened to me. I felt sleepy. Thorns and small sharp pebbles were hurting my feet and brought me back to reality. I walked nearly half an hour to the place where we were encamped, and there I found Don Melcher. Laughing, he gave me my clothes and said, "What do you think you're doing, walking without clothes in the middle of the desert?" I laughed. I knew that he was teasing me good-naturedly in order to break my obsession with the experience I had just had. When we discussed it later, he told me, "In a transformation of that type, the return is always a bitch. I once found myself completely naked in a very crowded public square. There's nothing one can do about it." Epilogue. The final farewell. When it was time for them to leave this world, Don Melcher and his companions prepared to face their destiny together. They were going to attempt the unthinkable, to perform one final maneuver as a group, the maneuver they referred to as the flight of the serpent. They were to jump together into an abyss. The only way one could accept as real an event as incredible as that is to witness it. That was exactly what happened to me and the other assistants. We were witnesses to their departure. In fact, the only way to verify the principles of sorcery is to try them out. I know that all else is just words. I know it because it happened to me with the Nawal's books. Thus, respecting the omens that have led me to this point, I relate here the events that took place, so that the truth can be established. The claims Carlos makes in his books about the departure of his teachers are in no sense metaphoric. The final jump into the abyss is a custom with the lineages of Nawals who practice that type of passage. This tradition remains as valid today as it always was. During my stay among them, the healers gave us explanations in various states of awareness about what they were proposing to do and provided us with detailed instruction about everything regarding the ultimate voyage. In the beginning, while we were in the rational state of awareness, the reason they gave us for what they were planning to do was that they were going to heaven. The Daddy God was calling them. As we progressed, the direction of their explanations changed. They said, among other things, "We're going to throw ourselves into the adventure. We will make ourselves pass through the eye of the needle. We'll float off like a particle of dust into that immensity out there. We'll transform into a flying serpent and melt into the cosmos. We are going to travel with the emanations of the cosmic spider." Each of those explanations was accompanied by appropriate lessons and exercises. On an occasion, I asked Don Melcher crabbily why we had to be drip-fed information. He said, "It's useless to give information that isn't going to make sense to you. We wouldn't be giving you anything. Explanations are given according to the apprentice's capacity to receive them. The animals in the zoo are given fruit inside blocks of ice so that they cannot gobble it up all at once, but have to consume it little by little. An instructor must proceed in the same fashion. Teach his apprentice in small morsels so that he can assimilate the knowledge without indigestion." He laughed at his own joke. As part of our practice, the healers had occasionally taken us in our dreaming to a place they called the edge of the world. At first I perceived it as an immense cave, but after a few visits, I began to see it as a tunnel of yellowish energy. It was as if we were floating in a sea of sparkling lights. There was nothing else there, only the yellow brilliance. The healers ironically referred to that last outpost as the gates of heaven. In more formal conversations, however, they referred to that perceptual limit as the gates of freedom, or the gates of eternity. To reach that place in dreaming is a big achievement, Don Melcher said once. To turn that into a real warrior's feat, however, one must go there with one's whole body. My insides cramped on just hearing him say those words. The mere thought of entering that place with my physical body made me shiver. Among ourselves, with the assistants had already discussed the subject of the grandparents' departure a great deal. We, the assistants, we had carefully considered our chances of survival as a group once we were abandoned to our fate. We had known for years that the moment of grandparents' departure was nearing, but no one knew the exact date. So we were thunderstruck when Don Melcher announced his last day on Earth. On hearing his words, a shiver ran through my whole body. I was like a condemned criminal who, although knowing what lies in store for him, still feels genuine surprise when the fatal day arrives. On his last day, Don Melcher got us together and said, "My dear friends, we have already taught you everything of relevance. The moment has now come to say the final goodbye. Tomorrow we shall embark on our ultimate voyage. What you will do with the knowledge you have received will be up to each one of you. We have given you the example of charity and helping your neighbor. We have also shown you the path that generations of healers have traveled. It only remains now to give you the ultimate demonstration of our faith. Tomorrow we fly on the wings of the Plumed Serpent. This is a mandatory step we all have to take one day, in one way or another, willy-nilly. After a lifelong preparation, sorcerers go to their appointment with death, armed with impeccable recapitulation of their lives. In exchange, death lets them pass free, as if they had never existed. It befalls to you, my dear friends, to witness our departure, as we had to be present when our teachers took their leave." He was referring to the embarkation on his ultimate voyage, the one from which there is no return. Carlos spoke of that event as the definitive journey. The healers called it the flight of the serpent. They had explained to me that for sorcerers, it is the culmination of a lifetime of struggle. On the penultimate day after the announcement, the assistants generated an unusual amount of energy. Frantic activity suddenly kicked off among them. They were all in a rush. They all had some task to complete. As for me, the news of the healer's departure left me somewhat stunned. I could not imagine my life without their presence. I looked around for Doña Silvia in the hope that she would tell me it had all been a joke, and that the announcement was merely a strategy to get us to behave impeccably. When I saw her, however, I realized that this would indeed be her last day on the face of the earth. She was radiant and appeared rejuvenated. I had never seen her acting like that. She was like a girl on Christmas Eve, waiting for her presents. She saw me and embraced me. Tears streamed freely down my cheeks. She said, "This is not an occasion to be sad. On the contrary, we should celebrate. We've been preparing for this moment all our lives, and the day has finally come. So we should be happy that we are on the point of fulfilling our destiny." Up to that moment, I had not realized how much I loved her. I told her that the idea of losing her was wringing my insides. I could not believe I would never see her again. "I wouldn't say never," she said, giving me a playful pinch. "Our paths might cross again someday." We then got ready for our last ritual together, which was to take place on the same hill where Don Melcher had taken me once to tell me about the Plumed Serpent. The spot was more than suitable for the ceremony. Whenever I visited it, images of places like Machu Picchu and Stonehenge would come to my mind. We got to the top of the hill in time to take leave of that day's sun, as we always did, honoring it and giving thanks for its light and heat. That night we shared songs, stories, and jokes that made us laugh. But there were tears as well, particularly whenever one of us expressed his feelings. My emotions were high during that final ceremony. We all wished the voyagers all the very best from the bottom of our hearts. Whenever we previously met in that place, each one had his own designated seat. But on that occasion, with the hour approaching, they seated us further away from the edge of the cliff. The first rays of the rising sun showed up just in time to witness the setting of the planet Venus, called Tlahuitziclapentecuhtli in the native language. That is the ancient name for the bright morning star, and also another name of Quetzalcoatl. Not a coincidence. The grandparents adopted the formation of the serpent, with Doña Silvia and Don Melcher at the head of the file. They went to the edge of the precipice on the southeast side of the hill, a vertical cliff of almost 200 meters high. From where I stood, I could see the formation walk towards the abyss, but instead of falling into it, they gained height. Watching the spectacle, I thought that they had justly named it the Flight of the Serpent. Seeing them float like that, I could understand the Mexican natives' obsession with the image of the Plumed Serpent. The light hovered over us for a moment, and I remembered the vision of Quetzalcoatl I had had at the ceremonial center. Then they reorganized, forming a circle of energy that vibrated as if it were a high-voltage electrical wire. Beginning to shine, the images of the sorcerers became diffused. I saw them as a luminous circle floating in the air, reminding me of the descriptions of flying saucers. Suddenly, the intensity of the brilliance became like that of the sun, blinding if looked at directly. Then they turned into a bubble of light. The sphere of light made one last turn above the mountaintop and disappeared in the direction of the star of the east. That was the last time I saw the grandparents. We are now on our own, retracing as best we can the path of our teachers. We have done well in our struggle, with the new Nahual pair at the helm. With the Atokayo, we have made progress in molding ourselves to our own matrix, so that one day, perhaps, we might, like the healers did, fly free into that immensity out there. The end.